Hello, my name is Maurice Fourie. I'm from GreenPro Consulting, and GreenPro Consulting provides solar and backup systems to both the residential and commercial markets operating in the Pretoria, Johannesburg, and in the Durban areas. I made a video about a bit more than 2 years ago about the Axpert system, where I explained the limitation of the Axpert system. I called it Beware the Expert. And the reason why the Axpert system has limitations is because in South Africa we use it as a hybrid system to be both a backup system and something that saves you electricity while you are connected to the grid. Now, if you go and read Voltronics, who are the designers and manufacturers of the Axpert system, if you read their documentation, you will see they clearly position this as an off-grid inverter. But the fact that we're using it as an on-grid hybrid inverter is okay, but it has limitations, and that's what I tried to address in the previous video. I found that nowadays a lot of people do their homework and they come to the conclusion that you really have two choices at the moment. Let's say your requirement is I want a backup system now, but I see my end game that I have to go off the grid simply because Eskom is going to become more and more unreliable and Eskom is going to become more and more expensive. And most people come to that conclusion. Then they find out that they really have two choices. You have to decide on an Axpert system architecture, or you have to decide on a Victron architecture. And if I say compare the Victron to the Axpert, there's no doubt that the Victron, if you want to do a comparison between the two, the Victron is going to come out far superior to the Axpert system. The question is really, do you want to pay more for a Victron system now so that your system is future-proof and you can expand it towards a hybrid and off-grid system? Or do you want to put in an Axpert system which you will have to replace at some point in time if you want to go off-grid via the hybrid stage, which you'll probably have to pass through if you go towards an off-grid system. So just to summarize a bit from my previous video, we said if you take panels and you connect it directly to an Axpert inverter, then you will have power available from the panels in the case where the power goes off. In other words, you lose the grid, then the panels will be able to charge the batteries and the panels will be able to provide some power to the essential loads. And that's really what the inverter was designed for, is for this to be off-grid. Then when the power comes on, you can actually charge batteries from the grid, or you can have power from the panels, which is now connected directly to the inverter. But if your loads, while the power is on, is more than the power available from the panels, then this inverter will switch from the grid through to these loads and you won't get the benefit of power saving from the PV panel. That's all explained in the previous video. So one of the solutions that I proposed there was to take your PV panels, connect it to a grid tie inverter, and then you will be able to combine the power coming from your grid tie inverter with the power coming from the grid, and you'll be able to feed your non-essential loads. You'll be able to charge your battery and you'll be able to feed your essential loads with a combination of power coming from the grid and from the PV panels. So the question is this now the ideal solution? And I think from what I've said just now, clearly the answer is no. So what I've done is I've written down 7 requirements, if you want to call it that here. And then I want to go through the Axpert system and say, how well does the Axpert system satisfy these 7 requirements? We start with the first one. We say, does it provide backup? Yes, it does. It does it very well. So while you're migrating from a backup to a hybrid to an off-grid solution, then you will have backup power. Does it very well? Does it like a job? The second question is, will you have solar power while the grid is off? Now, if you connected your panels to the grid-tied inverter, then if the power goes off, the grid tie inverter will stop producing electricity. That is a legal requirement. Every grid tie inverter in the world does it because it's a legal requirement in every country. So the answer is yes, if the panels are connected directly to the Axpert inverter. So now we ask ourselves, will you have solar power while the grid is on? Unfortunately, now the answer is yes. You'll have power, and you'll have power available to everything while the power is on if you connect the panels to the grid tie inverter. So now you see that you have the two options. You don't really know if you should connect the panels directly to the Axpert or whether you should connect it to a separate grid tie inverter, because both solutions have their limitations. And that is really where the big limitation comes into the Axpert system when you start adding panels to it. In other words, your requirement, as I've indicated there, is to have power available during off-grid as well as during on-grid situations. So let's look at a next requirement. Do you have an accurate state of charge? In other words, do you know exactly how much power is available in your batteries in an Axpert system? And the answer is no. An Axpert system measures the battery voltage, and while you're busy drawing electricity or power from the batteries, determining the state of charge of a battery by looking at the voltage does not work well. It's a rough indication, but it is really very far from the ideal solution. Now, the reason why you need to know that exactly is because mostly if you go towards a hybrid system and an off-grid system, you want to take some of the power that you gathered from the solar panels during the day, and you want to use that in an evening. In other words, you want to take some of the solar power and use it in a load shifting situation where you use it in the evening or in case of a power failure. Now, if you want to do that, you've got to know it's very exact. Let's say you decide I'm going to use 70% of the power available from the battery, in the case of a lithium battery. Then you're going to say, okay, let's use 25% in the evening, in any case. And then we reserve the difference between the 25 and the 70%, what's that, 45? We use that power for in case we have a power failure. So we keep reserve for in case of a power failure. So if you want to have that available as functionality, then you need to know exactly what the battery state of charge is. So if you don't have that, you don't have this. And that is really one of the problems with the Axpert, because it doesn't determine the state of charge of the battery accurately. Then, is it modular and scalable? Yes, it is scalable. You can add more inverters. You can, I think, add up to 9 in most cases. But every time, if you need more panels and the system that you have cannot accommodate more panels, the only thing you can do is to double the capacity of the whole system. And you'll see when we talk about the Victron, you can add on components and you can simply expand the system in certain dimensions. You don't have to expand the whole system for it to be scalable. So it's scalable, yes, but you can only scale the whole system. And is it modular? No, it's not modular. You can simply add more of the same, and you can have 2 or 3 or 4 inverters working together in parallel. Then the question is, what about remote monitoring, remote control, software upgrade, things like that? The Mark III, or some people refer to it as the King inverter, that now has a sort of local capability via Bluetooth, where you can monitor it, but you can't put your readings on the internet, access it from anybody. You can control it. You cannot change the settings of the inverter remotely. And you cannot do software upgrades remotely. In other words, me as the supplier of the system, if you are somewhere in Timbuktu, I can actually log onto your system and I can do a complete upgrade, or I can change the parameters of your system to improve the performance without having to go to site. And that is a major advantage in terms of the support that you can get from the supplier of the system. So let's look at the architecture of this Victron system, which you probably by now realize that I think is extremely good. The heart of the system is again an inverter. In this case, it's the multiplus inverter that you'll probably use in most situations. That inside it has got an AC to DC converter. In other words, you can have AC power coming in here. That power is provided onto a DC bus, and that DC bus can then charge the battery, or the DC bus power can also be taken to a DC to AC inverter, and you can power your critical loads from the DC bus. At the same time, the power on the DC bus, if you need more power here, it can actually push power back into your non-critical loads to save power, either from your batteries, or we'll discuss now from the solar panels as well. So you can see it can take power in here, it can take power out there. You can measure the power coming in or out there, so you can limit it and say, I don't want to push power back into the grid, but I do want to push power back into these loads. And you can push power onto your critical loads and your battery as well. So if you now want to add solar panels to this system, what you simply do is you add a solar charge controller and you add PV panels and you add that onto the DC bus. Now, because it goes onto a DC bus, or it is a DC coupled system, as we term it, then what you can actually do is you can take the DC power, you can power your loads with it, you can charge the battery with it, and you can power these non-critical loads with any excess power that you have. And it doesn't matter whether this grid is on or off, you have DC power available at all times. And that is really where the advantage of the Victron system comes in. At the same time, you can take this and you can have up to, I think it's 18. In other words, you can have 6 per phase or 18 in a 3-phase situation of these inverters working in parallel. Or you can simply take these MPPT, as people call it, or solar chargers, and you can put more and more and more of them in parallel. They'll work in parallel, and they'll take the power from the panels and feed it onto your DC bus. So if you have nice sunshine and you are totally off-grid, then what happens? The power comes from the panels, it goes through the solar charger onto the DC bus, it pushes the power in here, pushes the power in there, it charges the battery, and you can work completely off-grid. And really, try and think of any functionality. There is nothing that this architecture cannot achieve. So if you have all these devices from Victron, for example, there's the battery monitor. It's a small little, like 4 centimeter diameter little meter that you have. You get, at the moment, there's a Venus, there's a color control GX that's got a display. And I get the idea Victron is in the process of migrating to a few new devices. I think there's an Octo on the horizon. And I'm also not sure whether the Octo is going to be superseded by something else. I don't know exactly what Victron's plans are. But what it really does, this forms a central controller, and you can connect anything and everything from Victron and your batteries to this controller. Well, the batteries you can connect if they are integrated with Victron. And not all batteries are. Some batteries are integrated with the Victron controller. If the battery is not integrated from an intelligence point of view, then you use the information from the battery monitor to tell you exactly what the state of charge is. So that really makes the whole system behave like a completely integrated solution. So let's look at the same questions, and we now ask those questions for the Victron architecture. Yes, it can provide load shedding. You can have complete benefit from your solar power irrespective of whether the grid is on or off. Okay, you can have an accurate state of charge. As I said, you can either get it directly from the batteries or from the battery monitor. And that's why you can actually now allocate a portion of power for load shifting, and you can allocate a portion of power for the event of a power failure. Modular and scalable in all dimensions. And then the Venus that we showed in the previous slide can be used to monitor the system locally, in other words, via Bluetooth. You can put it onto the internet, and then you can control the system. You can change all the parameters. You can do remote software upgrades. There's really nothing that you cannot do on site, which you cannot do remotely once you set up the first system the first time. The first time, obviously, you have to be on site to load the basic software onto the system. So thanks for listening and thanks for watching. My name again is Marius Fourie, GreenPro Consulting. If you want to contact me with any questions that you have, feel free to do it. If you are my competitor, I don't mind answering questions and having a discussion with you as well. I do that quite often. So yeah, I hope you benefited from the video, and contact me if you have any questions.